She screamed like a banshee as they cuffed her on my front lawn. I'm the HOA president. You can't do this to me. But they did. Turns out, impersonating the homeowner, changing their locks, and filing a fake police report isn't just entitled, it's a felony. Funny how fast suburban tyranny crumbles when you keep your paperwork organized. Let me tell you how I got to that moment, starting with a sprinkler and a very loud mailbox hint. On a Thursday, the sun barely skimming over the rooftops of Ashland Grove, and I was standing barefoot on my front porch, cradling my first cup of coffee in what was supposed to be a peaceful new life. I just moved into my first home, a modest two-story brick house at the end of Maplethorne Drive. 10 years of night shifts on the railroad, missed holidays, and cheap apartments had led to this. My own quiet corner of suburbia. The air smelled like damp grass and cinnamon toast from a neighbor's kitchen, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without watching the clock. That was before she appeared. A woman in a pastel pink cardigan, holding a navy move binder thick enough to double as a brick, stepped onto my property like she owned it. She wore that specific kind of smile, tight-lipped and stretched too far, like she'd been waiting to deliver bad news her whole life. "Welcome to Ashland Grove," she said, her eyes scanning the length of my porch like it had already failed inspection. "I'm Karen Wilcox, president of the Homeowners Association." She didn't wait for a handshake. Instead, she extended the binder toward me like she was blessing me with Holy Scripture. "These are the neighborhood standards. Please review by the end of the day." I blinked. Sure, thanks." She didn't leave. "Also," she added, squinting at my lawn, "I noticed your sprinklers came on at 6:27, eh? That's outside the approved watering window. The guidelines allow for 5 o'clock to 6:15. She smiled again, tighter this time, like a balloon about to pop. "It's just a friendly reminder." Then she turned and walked off without another word, her flats making a soft slap against the pavement, binder swinging like a weapon at her side. I didn't think too much of it at first. Every suburb had its quirks, I told myself. Maybe she was just overly enthusiastic. Besides, I'd dealt with tougher people on the job, dispatchers who didn't believe in lunch breaks, supervisors who measured efficiency with a stopwatch. I figured if she was the worst I had to deal with, I could handle it. But there was something about her tone, her timing, and the way she delivered that reminder with a smile so sharp it could slice drywall. It didn't sit right. The next morning, she was back. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed a figure outside my window. Same cardigan, same clipboard. This time she was crouching near my mailbox, phone out, apparently timing how long it took for it to close after use. At 7:01 a.m., she rang my doorbell. I opened the door with phone still in my mouth. "Good morning," she chirped. "Your mailbox is non-compliant. The hinge is too loud and could disrupt morning quiet hours." She looked genuinely concerned, like I'd committed a war crime. That's when it hit me. Ashland Grove wasn't peaceful. It was just quiet enough for people like Karen to hear everything that didn't fit their vision. I shut the door that morning and stared at it for a solid minute, toothbrush still in hand, wondering what kind of universe I'd just moved into. Back in my apartment days, the only thing I had to worry about was whether the upstairs neighbor was vacuuming at midnight again. Now I was apparently being audited for mailbox acoustics. I figured maybe that would be the end of it, that Karen had made her introductory power move and would now go back to wherever HOA presidents roost between passive-aggressive flyovers. But by the following afternoon, I realized that what I thought was her peak had just been her warm-up. It started small. A sticky note appeared on my trash bin. "Lid must close flush with edge, safety hazard noted." My trash can, mind you, was from the HOA-issued set, the same as every other house on the block. Then came a second note, this time rolled and rubber banded to my garden hose. "Color not compliant with neighborhood aesthetic. Recommend switch to earth tones per section 4.2. The hose was green, forest green. But apparently, unless it matched the emotional tone of Karen's hydrangeas, it was an act of rebellion. I didn't even have time to take it off before the next letter arrived, this one an envelope sealed with the hose emblem and signed, "Warm regards, President Wilcox." The envelope contained a printed warning. I was in violation of the Architectural Balance Code for having patio furniture that was visibly utilitarian. I stared at my foldable Home Depot chairs and laughed out loud, which quickly turned into a sigh. I'd barely been here 2 weeks, and already Karen had flagged me for noise, water, color, furniture, and theoretical tone. If she was trying to speed run my patience, she was doing a great job. I tried to reason that these were small things, that maybe if I fixed the chairs, she'd cool down. So I went out that weekend and replaced them with a wooden bench. Big mistake. Monday morning, 7:45 a.m., I caught Karen standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, taking photos of the new bench. When I opened the door, she didn't flinch. "Did you submit a modification request for this structure?" she asked. Per Section 9, all external additions must be reviewed by the board for neighborhood congruence. Congruence. She really said congruence like she was quoting scripture. I told her politely that I didn't realize a bench counted as a structure. She just scribbled something and replied, "Intent does not excuse impact." Then she walked off like she'd dropped a mic. That afternoon, I received my first formal notice of noncompliance in a thick envelope, certified mail no less. Karen had escalated her campaign into full-on paperwork warfare, but something else caught my attention. In the notice, she'd added a handwritten note. "We're keeping an eye on your occupancy status." Occupancy status, that was new. I reread it, heart beating a little faster, and realized this wasn't just about sprinklers or furniture anymore. Karen was beginning to question whether I belonged in that house at all, and that was about to take things to a much darker, much more personal level. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at that handwritten line like it might morph into something less threatening if I blinked enough. "We're keeping an eye on your occupancy status." It was more than just HOA lingo. It was a veiled accusation wrapped in HOA letterhead and passive aggression. The implication was clear. She didn't believe I lived here legally, and given her flair for paperwork, I had the sinking feeling she'd already started digging for whatever she thought she could use to back that up. The worst part, I didn't know what else she was capable of. Until that point, she'd kept her campaign rooted in rules. But now she was tilting into something more personal, obsessive even. 2 days later, I was unloading a shipment of tools from my truck. Nothing excessive, just a few boxes from the hardware store. Karen appeared from seemingly nowhere like a suburban banshee summoned by the sound of cardboard. "Deliveries are only allowed between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays," she snapped. I checked my watch. It's 4:43. She squinted like I'd just tricked her in chess. "Well, you should still notify the HOA board in advance. Suspicious activity during delivery hours can be flagged." I laughed. "You're flagging toolboxes now?" She crossed her arms and muttered, "People who have nothing to hide don't act defensive." Then she pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of me holding a socket wrench like I'd just pulled it from a crime scene. That weekend, I invited my sister and her kids over for a cookout. Nothing major, just hot dogs, music low, backyard only. But around 6 p.m., I noticed Karen's silhouette peeking over my back fence like a vulture in capri pants. I waved. She didn't wave back. Instead, she pulled out her phone again. The next morning, I found a letter stuffed into my mailbox. Unsealed and unsigned this time, it read. "Unpermitted gatherings may violate occupancy restrictions for non-owner residents. Your lease agreement must be submitted to HOA compliance." Lease agreement. That, again, she still thought or wanted people to think that I was squatting. I called the HOA board line listed on the previous mailers and got a guy named Tom who sounded like he was halfway through a bowl of cereal. When I explained the letter, he paused and said, "Wait, Karen sent that? We haven't authorized any occupancy investigations. We don't even do that without a vote." Apparently, Karen had gone rogue. Tom sounded genuinely confused and maybe a little afraid to get involved. "Look," he said, "technically, she's just the acting president since last year, but she's assertive, yeah, and fire is warm." It was the first confirmation I had that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a me problem. But what I didn't know yet was how far she'd already gone. Because while I was defending myself from accusations of phantom lease violations and suspicious socket wrenches, Karen was plotting something that would push everything past the point of civility, something that would blur the line between HOA nonsense and actual crime. And by the time I realized how serious it would already be too late. The following Friday, I came home from work to find something taped to my front door. Not in an envelope, not slipped discreetly into the mailbox, just a plain sheet of printer paper, scotch taped dead center like a ransom note. It read, "Immediate notice, property under review for unauthorized occupancy, temporary custodianship assigned to HOA Representative K. Wilcox." No letterhead, no board signature, no legal basis whatsoever. My first thought was that it had to be a prank. My second thought was that it absolutely wasn't. I tore it down and marched inside, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with fury. This wasn't a note about paint color or furniture choice. This was her claiming my entire house. I opened my laptop and pulled up the property records for Ashland Grove just to calm myself down. There it was, my name, Ethan Walker, stamped on every line. I even checked the county deed office to confirm. The house was legally mine, paid for, closed, registered. But Karen clearly didn't care about legalities anymore. She cared about control. By Sunday morning, things got even weirder. I noticed my mailbox was stuffed, really stuffed, with identical flyers printed on pink paper. Each one had the same bold headline, "Concerned about squatters? You're not alone." Below that was a picture of a house that looked suspiciously like mine and a paragraph explaining that non-verified occupants had been observed in Ashland Grove. The flyers urged neighbors to report unusual patterns of residency to HOA compliant. Email listed, Karen Wilcox at ashlandhoa.org. I knocked on 3 doors nearby to ask if they'd seen them. All 3 neighbors awkwardly claimed they weren't sure who put them there, but their body language screamed otherwise. That night, I heard the rustle of paper outside. I turned off the porch light, peeked through the blinds, and saw Karen walking from yard to yard with a plastic grocery bag full of more flyers. She was placing them in mailboxes like a deranged mail carrier from a dystopian HOA-themed sci-fi. I stepped outside. "Shh, you're distributing misinformation about me now?" I said, loud enough for her to jump. She turned slowly, her expression somewhere between smug and possessed. "I'm informing the community. They have a right to know who's actually living among them. I own this house," I shot back. "You've seen the paperwork." She smiled like I had just confessed to something. Some papers don't prove intent. I should have called the police right then and there, but I didn't. Maybe part of me thought confronting her head on would make it stop. Maybe I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. Because 2 days later, while I was out of town for a 3-day work conference, she would make her boldest move yet, one that crossed from harassment into full-blown criminal territory and left me locked out of my own house. I flew back into Colorado late on a Tuesday night, dead tired from back-to-back seminars and a delayed flight that had tested every ounce of my patience. All I wanted was to take a hot shower, microwave some leftovers, and collapse into bed. But when I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. There was a strange stillness to the house, like the kind you get when someone's moved your furniture an inch to the left. I got out of the car, walked up to the front door, and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. I pulled the key out, double-checked it under the porch light, and tried once more. Still jammed. That's when I noticed the screws around the deadbolt were shinier than they used to be. My stomach dropped. I circled around to the back door, heart pounding. Thankfully, I'd hidden an emergency key under a loose brick near the deck, a habit from my apartment days that I'd never outgrown. That key worked. I slipped inside and stood frozen in the kitchen, expecting to see something stolen, broken, or rearranged, but everything was right where I left it. The coffee mug still sat in the sink. My coat still hung by the door. Even the blinking red light on my router was unchanged. But someone had changed my front lock. Someone had tampered with my home while I was away. And I had a damn good guess who it was. I walked into the living room and found a piece of paper lying flat on the floor, neatly placed in front of the fireplace. It was printed in bold, all caps, "This property is now under temporary HOA custodial supervision. Do not attempt to re-enter without authorization." No signature, no legal citation, just a fake warning printed from someone's home office. I checked the security app on my phone and scrolled through the camera history from the past 48 hours. And there it was, grainy black and white footage of Karen Wilcox on my porch in broad daylight, wearing rubber gloves, fumbling with what looked like a fresh set of lock hardware and a screwdriver. The next morning, I called the non-emergency police line. The officer I spoke to sounded skeptical at first until I mentioned the camera footage. He told me to document everything and advised me to file a formal report. I spent the next hour taking photos of the new lock, the paper, the footage, timestamps. Then, around 9:15 a.m., while I was brewing coffee and running through possible next steps, I heard the unmistakable rattle of a key turning in the front door. I froze, the door handle jiggled. I walked over quietly and looked through the peephole, and there she was. Karen, trying to let herself into my house like it was just another Tuesday morning neighborhood patrol. I threw the door open so fast she jumped backward, the key still dangling from her hand. What the hell you think you're doing? I snapped. She blinked, recovered, and immediately puffed up like a startled peacock. How did you get in here? This property is under HOA review. You're not authorized to be inside during an ongoing investigation. I stared at her, stunned by the sheer gall. You changed my locks. You broke into my house. You're standing on my porch with a key that doesn't belong to you. Karen didn't flinch. I was authorized by the Hendersons to watch the house. They're good friends of mine. They never mentioned selling it. I laughed once, cold and sharp. They sold it to me 5 weeks ago. I live here now. Her nostrils flared. That's impossible. You must be mistaken. No, I said, stepping closer, you are. Her hand shot into her purse, and within seconds she was dialing 911 again. Only this time, she didn't realize the trap she'd just walked into was far more real than the one she was trying to build. Karen paced backward down the steps as she spoke into the phone, voice quivering with a level of drama that would have put daytime soap stars to shame. Yes, I need police immediately. There's an intruder inside my friend's house. He's yelling at me and I'm scared for my safety. Her eyes darted up to mine as she added louder this time. He forced entry and I think he's dangerous. She didn't just lie, she weaponized the lie, rolling that out with practiced panic. I stood there, speechless for half a beat, then turned on my heel, walked into the kitchen, and came back holding the folder of paperwork I kept for situations just like this. I wasn't dangerous, but I was done playing nice. The police arrived less than 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulling into the driveway, lights spinning but sirens off. Karen met them halfway, waving frantically like she was flagging down a lifeguard. That's him, she pointed, her voice cracking with theatrical stress. He's inside, and I believe he broke in while the owners were away. I'm the HOA president, and I was just trying to check on the property when he confronted me. He's not supposed to be here. One officer approached her, calm and methodical. The other turned to me, hand resting on his belt. Sir, do you have identification, any documents proving you live here? He asked. I handed him my driver's license, the deed to the house, and the signed closing documents, all clipped and labeled. I bought this property 5 weeks ago from the Hendersons, I said. Karen here changed my locks while I was on a work trip and is now trying to claim I don't live in my own home. Both officers took a moment to review the paperwork. Karen hovered just a few feet behind them, arms folded, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like she was trying to hold her composure together with spite alone. That can't be real, she barked. I spoke to Mrs. Henderson just last week. She didn't say anything about selling. These must be forged. One of the officers raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, we'll need to verify that. Do you have any documentation proving your connection to the property or the Hendersons? Karen scoffed. No, not on me. But I have a key. They gave it to me years ago for emergencies. She held up the very key she'd dropped on my porch earlier like it was her golden ticket. The second officer stepped aside to make a call while the first one walked with me to the side to ask more questions. I explained the entire sequence of events, the flyers, the notices, the mailbox harassment, the cameras, especially the footage of her changing the lock. Do you have that video handy? He asked. I pulled it up on my phone. There was Karen, clear as day, wearing rubber gloves and twisting a screwdriver into my front door while humming to herself. The officer watched in silence, then turned to his partner just as he hung up the call. County records confirm the property was legally transferred to Mr. Walker on March 2nd. The Hendersons are no longer the owners. Karen's mouth dropped open like a broken garage door. This has to be some kind of mistake, she sputtered. They wouldn't just sell without telling me. The officer didn't flinch. Ma'am, I need to see your identification, please. She hesitated, then pulled her wallet from her bag and handed over her license. The officer glanced at it, then back at her. You live 3 blocks away. You're not related to the Hendersons. You're not listed on the property records, and you're not authorized to be in this home. Her voice dropped an octave, suddenly more breathless than indignant. But I was protecting the neighborhood. That's what HOA leaders do. The officer gave her a long, slow look. Not like this, they don't. Then he held up the key. How did you get this again? Karen shifted on her feet. They gave it to me years ago, for emergencies. I thought this counted. You thought wrong, he said. And just like that, her reign over Ashland Grove began to crack, not with a bang, but with a quiet pair of handcuffs clicking behind her back. Karen flinched as the officer stepped behind her, one hand on her wrist, the other pulling out a pair of cuffs with the kind of quiet finality that made the whole street hold its breath. You can't be serious, she yelped, twisting to look at him like she'd just been betrayed by gravity itself. I am the HOA president. I have responsibilities. The officer didn't blink, and you're currently being placed under arrest for criminal trespassing, unlawful entry, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent. Her voice went shrill, bouncing off the stucco walls of the nearby homes. I was trying to protect the community. That man he's not even on the committee. As the officer continued reading her rights, Karen turned toward me with wide, disbelieving eyes, as if I were the one committing the crime by not vanishing on cue. She jerked her head toward the street where neighbors had begun emerging from behind curtains and driveways, phones already out, quietly filming the HOA Queen's fall from grace. One neighbor, Mrs. Laney from 2 doors down, mouthed finally at me as Karen was gently guided toward the back of the squad car. Her pastel cardigan flapped like a defeated flag. The whole scene looked like a viral clip in the making, complete with the exact kind of over-the-top meltdown that social media devours. An officer stayed behind to take my formal statement while his partner dealt with Karen. I walked him through everything: dates, emails, printed flyers, the video footage, even the sticky notes on my trash can. He took it all seriously, nodding and taking notes. When I showed him the invoice from the locksmith Karen had hired, charged to the HOA credit card no less, his brow lifted. This alone might be enough for a fraud charge, he muttered. She claimed to be Kay Henderson when signing off on the work order. That was news to me. She not only impersonated someone, she'd impersonated someone who didn't even live there anymore and paid for it with community funds. That wasn't just illegal, that was nuclear. Within 24 hours, word had spread across Ashland Grove like wildfire. Not only had Karen been arrested, she'd also been exposed for embezzling HOA funds to cover her investigations. The locksmith company had confirmed the order under the fake name, and the HOA board, once too intimidated to challenge her, called an emergency session to strip her of her position. Turns out, she hadn't even been officially reelected last cycle. She'd simply assumed the title after the previous president moved out. Her crown was self-appointed, her authority paper-thin, and now she had charges to match: trespassing, unlawful entry, impersonation with intent to defraud, and misuse of HOA funds. At her arraignment, the courtroom was packed with more neighbors than I'd seen in the last 3 weeks combined. Karen sat at the defense table looking like she'd aged 10 years in 48 hours. When the judge read out the charges, she muttered something under her breath, something about just trying to preserve community values, before her attorney cut her off. I didn't stay for the whole hearing. Didn't need to. Justice had already made its point, loud and clear. Karen wasn't just facing consequences. She was finally irrevocably exposed. And in a neighborhood like Ashland Grove, that kind of fall isn't forgotten. It's remembered in whispers, in screenshots, and in every single porch conversation for the rest of the year. In the days that followed, Ashland Grove felt like it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Neighbors who had barely made eye contact with me before were now stopping by with muffins, beers, or just to shake my hand and say, "Glad somebody finally did something." Turns out Karen hadn't just been monitoring my mailbox. She'd been lording over the entire block like a suburban tyrant with a clipboard. People shared stories I couldn't believe: fines for humming too loudly while gardening, threats over wind chimes. One poor guy even got written up for having a lawn gnome with aggressive facial expression, and no one had ever pushed back. Until now. The HOA board wasted no time. Within a week, Karen's name was scrubbed from all official documents. Her access to HOA funds was permanently revoked. A formal vote stripped her of any involvement in future community affairs, and a restraining order barred her from coming within 500 feet of my property. They even launched an internal review of all her past complaints, many of which turned out to be fabricated, unapproved, or simply made up. Tom, the same board member who once sounded terrified to question her, asked if I'd consider joining the HOA reform committee. I laugh. Only if there's a known protection clause in the charter. He didn't blink. We'll make it section 1. Meanwhile, the footage of Karen's arrest, shaky, dramatic, complete with her yelling, "I built this neighborhood," as she was loaded into the squad car, went viral. Someone edited it with dramatic violin music and uploaded it to Reddit under the title, "HOA Karen Gets Cuffed After Changing Locks on Wrong Guy." It hit 1.2 million views in 3 days. People in the comments called her Suburban Voldemort. Others crowned me the Lawn Avenger. My sister printed out one of the top comments and taped it to my fridge. This is the HOA version of David vs. Goliath with extra HOA paperwork. And yet life eventually settled. The mail arrived without warning notes. My porch light stayed on as long as I damn well pleased. I even bought a second gnome, this one wearing sunglasses and flipping the bird. A petty tribute? Maybe. But every time I passed it, I smiled, because this wasn't just about a house. It was about drawing a line and finally watching someone trip over it. One quiet morning, a week after the hearing, I stood on my porch sipping coffee. The autumn wind rustled the hedges, the sky was clear, and for the first time since I moved in, there was no tension hiding in the breeze. Then my phone buzzed. Motion detected at front door camera. I checked the feed. It was just a cat, Karen's cat, I think, sniffing around my mailbox like it had inherited her spirit. I chuckled. The app tagged it as unusual visitor. I tapped ignore and went back to my coffee. Because Ashland Grove finally felt like home, and no clipboard, no pastel cardigan, and no HOA Karen could take that away from me again. Some people think standing up for yourself means shouting the loudest, but sometimes it just means keeping receipts. Literally. In a world full of Karens with clipboards and inflated egos, it's easy to feel small, especially when the system seems built for people who know how to exploit it. But the truth is, entitlement collapses fast when faced with facts, cameras, and a little backbone. I didn't win by out-yelling her. I won by staying calm, documenting everything, and refusing to be intimidated. If you've ever been bullied by someone hiding behind fake authority, remember this: paper beats noise. Always. And justice? Sometimes it shows up in handcuffs and goes viral. Drop a comment if you've ever dealt with a HOA tyrant or a real-life Karen. Hit like if you believe community should be built on respect, not fear. And share this. If your team Gnome, always team Gnome.